The following session is going to be slightly interactive, very informative and educational. Guys, take it away.
Hi. So just as a quick introduction, my name's Josh Lawson. I'm one of the members of the Rethinking Economics network. I'd previously studied economics at undergraduate level at York University, and then I went on to do a master's in a completely different field of subject, because for reasons we will explain, at SOAS University, and now I'm based back in Leeds with the local group we have here called OpenEconomics, based at Leeds University.
I'm Ben, I'm a third year undergrad and I'm a member of PostCrash Economics Society in Manchester. So I'm still in the midst of economics.
So kind of what we'll be focusing on today is economics education within higher education in the UK, also trying to contextualise it to sort of the international sphere. What we're here to talk about is essentially why reform of the economics curriculum is of critical importance. The modern reliance on economics as a discipline is on a narrow body of theory, paradigm of sort of neoliberalism, which we've sort of been touching on before. That means that economic students are not only receiving a constrained education that lacks critical and analytical tools, it also means that we're failing to produce policy in the academic settings that's relevant to these pressures that we have in the modern world around environmental and social issues and everything else. What we're going to do is give a quick breakdown of kind of the student movement for campaigning about economics curriculum change in the UK, and then we're going to go into a bit more detail about what it is that we think is specifically wrong with the components of how the economics curriculum is taught in the UK and what we can do about changing that and what work that we are doing. Just as a quick thing before we get going, is it possible just to canvass the group and who in here considers themselves to be a trained economist or is like works within academia, within economics, or feels like they can, you know, how many people in the room does that? Because I'm sort of on the fence, I wouldn't say that I am either. So it's quite a green group. Most people here wouldn't count themselves as economists.
Which is good.
Which is good. Like, it's going to make it much more interesting for everyone. But it's, you know, it's something to outline. So one of the things that as a network we try to do is, one of our big things is about democratizing economics, bringing it into the public sphere more and making it something that people can engage with. So at any point we're discussing something or a concept and you're not sure what that is, please feel free to like interject, and we're quite happy to elaborate on that stuff and kind of expand on it, because that's an important aspect of trying to break down the jargon that is too often used in economics. So in terms of where we are, the recent wave of UK student activism on curriculum change started around sort of late 2011 in Cambridge. They had a Cambridge Society for Economic Pluralism, which is, you know, the jazzy, exciting names. And then there were sort of societies starting at UCL. They had PostCrash in Manchester starting it was in around June 2013 that Rethinking Economics as a network, which was linking all of the different groups within the UK, started. Or we launched our network of sort of young economists, as we called it. All of the societies that we have, all of the local groups based at universities, are based around the principle that we want a broader, more pluralistic approach to how economics is taught, so we can better understand the world around us, rather than learn just abstract mathematical models that are disconnected from our day-to-day lives and the economy that we see around us. For many of us as well, it has been the frustration that an economics degree has no longer become about something that you learn about how to change the world and engage with social, sort of the political economy around you. It becomes something as a passport to the city, so a well-paid job that has very, very little social value for all involved. As part of the sort of networking that we've been doing and sort of media attention that we've had from like the work of people like PostCrash, we've got many more societies now, and we're looking at ones that are based all around the world. So we have groups in Brazil and Italy and China and Germany, and for us this all adds to the kind of academic arena that we're trying to create, which is multiple viewpoints, many different ideas, like a creative and interactive debate about economics, and trying to create a space where there are many voices talking about many different things within it.
The debate is obviously ongoing now in Rethinking Economics, but it began in 2000 in Paris. There was a movement there which was entitled we basically want to get out of this imaginary world that we're being taught and want more real world application. And actually on the back of that, the French government set up an inquest into it, but as we know, these token inquests sometimes don't result in any change. So basically they're still going on, but there's been little to no change in Europe by the way economics is taught in Europe. Then you've got, obviously there's movements in Germany, but the thing that's sort of changed now is obviously after 2008, there's a lot more focus by the public in academia on the way economics is being taught.
So one of the things to go on now is like, what is wrong with the current economics curriculum? Why is it there are so many different groups that are interested in trying to get the sort of wholesale reform? So we've already sort of established that most people in this group don't have an economics degree, which is just fantastic, I have to tell you. So one of the sort of the quick exercise we want to do, and this is something we've done with sort of focus groups and different groups we've engaged with, is just to the person next to you, two quite simple questions. The first one is, what is economics? And the second one is, what is the economy? So just sort of for 2 minutes, ask each other that question and try and answer it. You don't need to be succinct, but answer it how you feel like, you know, what is the economy to you? Just give that a go. Is there anyone brave enough to offer the answer to one of those two questions? So just to the group, what is economics? What is it? To a group of non-economists, what is economics with a big E?
I mean, we're very far away from a proper definition, but we're talking about the sort of world of resources that allow people to reproduce themselves and the world around them.
Yeah, so an innate social component of, you know, economics is related to people's material existence to a certain extent.
Yeah, and is particularly around about the resources that are needed to do that.
Any other feedback?
Well, economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources. That's the bog standard textbook thing. Whereas economy seems to me about an investigation as to who gets what and what's being distributed, where, how and why. Which then, in the context of the day, brings in notions of inequality and distribution and how things get distributed.
So, just to sort of continue with where we're going with it, when we did this focus group, we've done it with a group of people who thought they were coming to a session about money, and then we told them it was economics, and they were like, oh, God. Most of the people in that group, and this was just, you know, the standard surveys you'd use for a focus group if you were doing any kind of research, literally could not give an answer to the question of what is economics. Most of them didn't, 70% didn't. What is the economy got people talking a lot more, and it got talking about these kind of issues. Who gets what? Why do things operate in a certain way? You know, actual experiences with their day-to-day life. Why is stuff more expensive? Why, you know, how do interest rates work? You know, you start to open up the thing a little bit more. And this is just sort of generally where we are with economics as a discipline, is that how it is taught within the economic curriculum is a single, unquestioned methodological framework characterized by individual representative agents optimizing their profit or utility within perfectly competitive markets to reach equilibrium. Economics is defined as the allocation of scarce resource, and this allocation problem is solved within that framework. This approach can be useful. It can be useful for some aspects of human behavior, but it is not the only credible and correct way of looking about how human beings operate. For example, Adam Smith, another classical economist, defined economics in different ways, and they were much more relevant to the contextual examples of when they were writing and what they were writing about. Whereas most people would say that Adam Smith knows his stuff, like he's probably one of the most popular economists. People know who Adam Smith is. But now we define economics that it systematically excludes all these other economic alternative thoughts, including pretty much the original work of Adam Smith. Most people who study economics now will not study Adam Smith. He will not be brought up as part of a curriculum thing. Obviously his theory will be landed upon, but people will honestly not know what he substantively wrote about. This is, you know, a significant problem. Everything that is not the concern of the current framework in which economics is analysed is moved to a separate secondary concern. It's the concern of philosophy or politics or sociology or anthropology or behavioural studies. It's not economics per se.
Yeah. The methodology in economics is unquestioned. I mean, you get taught all these axioms and assumptions, and it's just, well, that's the assumptions. They never turn around and say, well, what do you think about the assumptions? Do you think they're right? Do you think the axioms that you're using your model, basing your models on, are they right? You get taught a lot of, basically, actually, this is a true. So in my first year, I done an essay on macroeconomics, and one of the feedback on the thing was too much critical thinking. You don't need it for this for this bit of macroeconomics. Just use the equations and don't actually think about it. Please don't think about it. But you'd think after the recent crisis that you'd have a lot more critical thinking. People turn around and going, well, is this correct? What we're actually looking at here? Is this are graduates fit for purpose? Which the Bank of England were asking in 2008, and the answer is still no. We're definitely not fit for purpose. And I mean, Josh spoke about Adam Smith there. If we're not, I mean, I've heard Adam Smith's name mentioned once in one of my economics lectures. And if we're not even looking at it, how can we then critically engage with what he's actually saying is well, his all what free markets, yeah, the invisible hand. That phrase there's used to then portray in policy debate, push that, and then let's not look at all his other work where there's a breadth of other knowledge within his work that is just untouched. But the vast amount of economics undergrads have not taught about Keynes, which is crazy, really. I mean, this sort of view that if somebody's got a view and you don't agree with it, you just go, well, his view's stupid. Like Hayek said about Keynes, that he's a fantastic mind, but not a very good economist. Doesn't really know what he's talking about. That sort of stuff just has no place in academia, no place really in life, really.
I mean, my experience, I started my economics undergraduate in 2008. So, the world was falling apart, upheaval, huge change. I did 3 years of mathematical models. I didn't do any contemporary data. I didn't do any applied things. There wasn't a module on banking. There wasn't a module on finance. There wasn't a module on crisis. And I mean, this is a Russell Group University standard undergraduate platform. At no point are you taught to engage with anything else. And the concerns of students when they're raised are, once we develop a better complexity of these models that we're using, then we'll be able to develop a critical insight into the issues that you want to talk about. But we'll be doing that later, so let's just keep learning this model. All of the examination was through multiple choice. No part of a sort of history of economic thought or anything else. Things are taught out of a textbook as if they are sort of the defined fact. And we get a representation of this every year at the annual conference that we put on. We try and both this sort of PostCrash put on the unconference and we put on our conference, and the idea is to bring non-economically trained people into an area where they can discuss and engage with, as we are today, different ideas about how our society runs, how we allocate resources and things. And every year at our conference we get a small but solid contingent of people who work in the philosophy of science. Philosophy of science is not a glamorous university area anymore. In fact, the departments have shrunk quite significantly over the last few decades because it's basically not amenable to funding. But we still get like a little group of people who are interested, or who are academics who work within philosophy of science. And they'll say the same thing every time they come. Each one of them will say the same thing independently of one another, which is that economics pretends like it's physics. It says, these are the rules that we have. This is how things work. People are self-maximizing. We have equilibrium theory. We have general equilibrium theory. We have these axioms, and these are how things work. Everything fits into the sort of the typecast around these axioms. Whereas all they say, it's crazy. Like, looking at it, and we're not economists, but it's clearly biology. What you need to do is take the data, the empirical data of the world around you, and build models around it. And then you add more data to it. And if the model doesn't hold, then the model doesn't work, and you make a new one. Whereas in economics, you can see almost the entire field of behavioral economics is subsets to the clause of that we're self-rational maximizers. In fact, there are many instances where we're not. But that is still the default line. That is how we model, because it's difficult to make complex models when you have very variable and irrational human behavior. So what you do is say, oh, we are actually rational self-maximizers, except in this instance when we don't, and this instance when we don't. And then it becomes so complicated that actually what are those axioms representing anymore? They seem to be a throwback to a kind of formulaic way of approaching how to look at something that isn't relevant to actually how that subject matter works.
Yeah, I think a point as well to include there is we don't hate maths, because we get this a lot, that if you say that you don't like a mathematical model, you get told that you don't like maths. Just because you say that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't other mathematical models out there that can do the job, because a lot of, especially what's been wrote about the movement and stuff like that, is, oh, well, it must just be rubbish at maths. Which is, should say some of my paper. God, it's good stuff there. But moving on from that, I mean, the lack of real-world application within the subject's ridiculous. And if you had people coming in from politics and psychology and sociology and looking at some of the way economics is being run, they would just laugh at it. Yeah. And I mean, Manchester, where I'm from, the economics department there, I think a few years back they had an opportunity to go into the business school, whereas currently they're in the School of Social Science, and they chose not to go into the business school because other subjects in social sciences keep the nose out of what economics is doing. So it's that sort of thing where we need to move on to embodying all the different knowledge that we have in all these different social sciences and within business, and coming together and actually solving problems, rather than saying, oh, well, I'm an economist, I'm better than a sociologist, which is currently what happens at the institutions. But, I mean, they need to stop pushing to the periphery Keynesian economics, feminist economics, environmental economics, because these are tools within a larger toolkit that can be used to solve problems. And I mean, I'm not sitting here saying there's no point in using neoclassical economics, because there's lots of tools within that can be used, but just using that leads to undergraduates and economists being unable to understand the subject, in my opinion.
So on the point that Ben made is that economics is not a discipline that other ones go to for valuable insights into things, except for the addition of game theory, which is sort of a general application thing that has sort of moved into different areas. Is that economics, similarly to sort of a lot of the body of sort of international relations stuff, is not a science that is lent upon by other disciplines very well. So it also ends up that a lot of the theory becomes quite highbrow, it becomes quite specific to occasional areas, and it's not lent to sort of politics. Discipline doesn't come into it, a lot of other social studies. There isn't that permeability of the research that is produced, which obviously then somewhat defeats the point of doing it, because there isn't the critical engagement inside economics, but also outside of it with other disciplines about what it's actually producing and what it's trying to achieve. Did you have a...
Yes, I thought you made a very good point earlier on. I think what's missing, I was an undergraduate in the early 60s, and I remember looking around at all the various courses, PPE and all this sort of thing, and all of them, Manchester, London, Oxbridge, all of them had courses in history of economic thought. It was essential. It was considered to be a key course for to become a graduate in this area. And I remember later on teaching at Sheffield University, books by Jeff Billing and so on were very, very popular with students. And I think that's what's disappeared. It seems slowly, almost like by slow degree, osmosis almost, the putting it in the context of economic thought. Economics is now just become quite limited. And I was so pleased that students at Manchester, this is when it first came to my attention, started to ask questions as you have described. It was, it was heartening, I think. It's very important. I think we've got to move back to a much broader study of economics. If you like, Adam Smith was actually the professor of political economy, if we recall. And I think that's the way we should see it.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I mean, but the point about economic thought is, I mean, academics are put under so much pressure to get themselves published in 3-star journals. And those 3-star journals are all just neoclassical journals. So straight away they're sort of pushed towards, if they want to work at these universities, they're sort of pushed towards that. And I mean, that's a problem that we've come across as well when speaking to academics, that, well, we'd love to get involved, but we have, we want to get our research published. We won't get employed by the institution if we publish this sort of thing. So I mean, one of the points made was, academics need to feed families too, which is a great point, isn't it? Really, that they're put under so much pressure to sort of like getting involved in what we're doing. I think.
Yeah. So there's a list of academics that are interested in kind of these issues as well, called Reteaching Economics, and there are a lot of them based at Leeds University. And from speaking to them and kind of discovering a lot of these sort of junior academics who are sort of coming in, is that Leeds University doesn't have a standalone economics department. It's part of the business school, which essentially opens up greater journals that they can publish in, these 3-star journals, which means that they have a lot more academic freedom in what they can express. So a lot of academics that we speak to, are sympathetic to our cause, have to find specific institutions where they can actually write about the things that they're interested in. Because if they want to, so the person at York University who, until 1991, history of economic thought and essentially pluralist economic ideas were mandatory modules on the undergraduate course. They were discontinued in the 90s alongside the rise of sort of neoliberal application of policy within the UK and around the world. He now has to publish in, he publishes in population economics, because it's basically the least offensive to his taste within the mainstream canon that he can do, because otherwise he has to leave that university, because they won't renew him as an academic if he can't get published. And that's a really serious problem, because you've got institutional pressures upon academics who might have a willingness to see that actually what the kind of content they're producing, the state of their subject that they're obviously heavily invested in, is not where it should be, but they're under bigger pressures. They've got their own family and livelihood to think about, and that's a big thing we come up with as part of our network, is that we're not trying to disparage what the current thing is. in and of itself we're disparaging the lack of other available options. We're going into economics departments and trying to convince people who've spent 30, 40 years working on this theory, who were quite heavily invested in it, who are producing a lot of this research, to be amenable to these other things, but they're subject to the same pressures as the kind of lower order academics. So it's quite a difficult line to cross when you're talking about curriculum change, is to bring it into institutions that have big external pressures about how academia run, how researchers run. And we have a statistic about within the within economics literature, a big majority of stuff is focused on America in terms of the publication. So it's in English and it focuses on America and principally Europe. Things like South America experiences, kind of Marxist traditions and histories there, developing world, obviously things like China, they are not mainstream content. They're the kind of thing that gets sort of 1 out of every 5 articles in a journal or something is designated towards that kind of thing. So there's also this predominance of a particular format of economic thought on a particular contextual analysis, which is certainly not representative of the diversity of opinions and material reality of the world that we live in.
Yeah. I mean, what we've found is that we get a lot of so academics come towards the end of the career, get involved, which is nice.
You've got a theory about that?
A little one. Yeah, have you got a question?
Well, just on this point, I mean, I think what you're doing is really brilliant. I'm viewing it from afar, and I know some friends have been involved with what you're doing. But one of the things I would say is that the fracturing of classical political economy into economics and politics and sociology and anthropology and criminology and onwards. That's not a once and for all thing. So what you're doing is important, but I'm not sure that doing it within economics is always necessarily the most hospitable home. So, or that there are not places and courses where the broader, more pluralistic interpretations that you're looking for are not there. So I know, for example, how we teach economics here isn't like that. And in our department we don't call it economics, but we teach in a much more pluralistic way. So there are things that are available, and to you, there are people there. Stuart Shields, who are quoted.
Stuart.
I'm sure you know Stuart.
Oh yeah, the political economy in Manchester. I'm applying actually to do that as a master's.
Good.
Stuart Shields is the head of that actually. Where he's a guy called John O'Neill is. But that stuff, that's a. But I mean, at undergraduate, you can't at Manchester and Jerry, you can't go and do it.
No,
there's nothing. I mean, you could. There's stuff in politics I've went on to do and things like that.
I mean, it's definitely a fair point. There's universities like Kingston and SOAS where there are academics who engage with this stuff and will teach rounded critical syllabus. But if you're interested in economics, say you're interested in environmental economics, and you're looking at a university to go to, there's currently no way that you could figure out now what actual undergraduate kind of education you're going to receive, and also whether it's going to actually, get you critically involved in the topic that you're interested in. I know lots of people who have gone to study, like I've studied an economics undergraduate degree and be so off-put by it that I moved into international politics for my further education because it was so far detached from the actual experiences I wanted. And an important part of this is to what extent people are doing economics as an undergraduate degree and then moving into important areas of policy making within the institutions in this country who do not have a critical understanding of economics and within this academic sphere that is so limited in terms of what they're being taught that you have to wonder where they're going to be going in terms of producing the policy that we're seeing now. Is how is that being reproduced in the future? Well, it's being reproduced in 3-star journals by academics in economics departments whose students are going to take their place, who also have this narrow conception of economics, which is what we see as the problem. There are, of course, many positive examples of people working against that, but
I'm finding this really exciting because I went to LSE actually, and my first essay I got back was original thought is not necessary at this point, and I went there.
I do.
Honestly,
and I went to LSE so excited. Like I really thought here was a place where we could come up with ideas, discuss them, and everything like that. And that first essay, I basically just got through my exams because I didn't go to any lectures. I thought this is not the place for me. But I actually thought, I don't get this. This doesn't make sense to me. And I thought, because I'm not as smart as these people, because that was my first thought. There's all these words, there's all these theories. This doesn't make sense. But I just thought, maybe I don't get it. Maybe they're just smarter than me. And so it's really exciting to hear you guys saying, well, maybe they're just writing it because that's what they have to kind of write, justify.
There's a story, I'll badly paraphrase, by Ha-Jun Chang, who's a professor at Cambridge University and is at the forefront of this, supporting this kind of move towards pluralism within economics. And for those of you in the room, he's got a recent book out called The Economics User Guide, which is a very good, like, step-by-step introduction to mainstream economics, essentially, so I would recommend it. But he has the story that in economics, if you're the super intelligent rising through the academic ranks, you'll write on something that's so specific and complicated that no one except you and maybe a few other academics will understand it. And as you go down the supply chain and basically your theory becomes more accessible and potentially relevant, you're considered to be sort of a lesser academic, and you get to the bottom and you write on development economics. And with, the sociology of the academic area is that basically the big dogs, the smart people, are producing this stuff that's just complicated and quite narrow. And actually it doesn't engage with what their students' interests are. Not to say that it's obviously not relevant in a broader sense, it's just this is the kind of, the idea of what economics departments have about what they're doing and what theory they're producing and things like that.
It's interesting to listen to this. I mean, certainly there's clearly a problem in economics which is very extreme and has been exposed by events of 2008 and since. A lot of what we're describing here is disciplinarity rather than just economics. And you're describing a process which is reinforced by the metrics regime and by disciplinarity, and which actually describes a lot of other disciplines too, including, for example, IPE. IPE, when I first went into it, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, was very much a post-disciplinary, post-economics kind of thing, and then became ultra-economics in the States, because disciplinarity kind of sucked it in and normalised it in that sense. So I suppose that the bigger question here is it rational to maintain economics as a separate discipline? Is this something we can do by reforming within economics, given that you are both refugees from economics? And I work with refugees from economics, I work in business school. We've got lots of economists who call themselves economists but wouldn't go near an economics department anymore. Can we reform economics from within?
Currently, I'd say it's very difficult. These economic departments are very inward facing, and they will basically refuse. I think a lot of departments will refuse that. I think what you said about reforming it so that you have political economy and economics sort of coming together, and that makes complete sense, but an economist wouldn't see it as that way.
No, but nor does the government.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, are people in the room familiar with the Reinhardt and Ragoff paper and all this thing? So there were two American academics. They produced a paper that said if your long-term debt is above 90% of your GDP, your long-term growth prospects die. Like, it's literally over pretty much in the long term. So this became a massive thing. It was like, this is where we justify austerity politics because we need to get debt down. Otherwise, in the long term, it's going to be really bad. It seemed like solid academic reasoning. In essence, I think he was a graduate student, a student in America got hold of their data set and it turned out there was a basic numerical error in it. And it was wrong. The entire thesis was incorrect. But Ben Carson, the Republican candidate, who's obviously a intelligent gentleman, cited this 3 days ago. Again, that specific, if GDP debt is this size, and this is also the thing, it's the production of this policy suits sort of it can be the political needs in terms of the expansion of economics, is that, yes, we can say that economics as a discipline is a bit of a closed box, and actually there are much more interesting areas affiliated, like post-disciplinary areas, but still the production of things from that have a serious and real impact in the ideological and economic policy that is produced in the real world. And, that is quite scary, that a paper with a basic numerical error can justify what is, a global regime of austerity. I mean, that was the founding paper based upon that, and it had a basic error in it. Like, there are, that is a serious procedural problem within how economics publishes and cites and researches and everything, which is quite profound.
Sorry, just I wanted to raise this because it's behind you, one of which is schools outreach. So why aren't we starting this economics education at a far younger age? Whether that's financial literacy, financial language skills, but also, I guess, to drop the G bomb, gender. Why economics events are many of us, the females in this room, often the only women? Why is it still such a male-dominated sector?
I mean, there are things that we've sort of discovered because of our organising group, it's also something that we focus on as a network, we try to run sort of non-hierarchically, so sort of everyone, we value diversity in other people's opinions, and we know there is a serious lack of senior female representation. At the conference, we aimed for a gender balance, and it was obviously much more difficult to find available female academics because they're such a minority in a lot of departments. I think it's because of the kind of the how it engages with issues and the kind of policy output. Like, a lot of people move on if they're actually interested in values like the environment and equality and everything else. Is that mainstream economics doesn't do much for them, and I think a lot of them leave and end up going into basically areas that are a bit more interesting, a bit more critically engaged, working within sort of sociology or anthropology a bit more. So I think it's kind of an exclusionary thing, but it's also where we are with economics comes from the departments of 30 years ago, which were obviously quite very gendered towards men, and that's obviously sort of had an impact. Maybe it's worth sort of talking.
I mean, so we've got the schools outreach on there. So we've started now. We set up to campaign for economics change, but now we're to try and do some public education in economics. So we're going into sixth form schools, sort of doing workshops in there, and that's sort of countrywide. Which is, so the point is, I think that economics, especially basic economic literature, like Katie said, should be taught at a young age. I mean, especially, it's crazy how I think Positive Money, who've set up to try and change where money creation comes about, they done a survey, I think it was on MPs, and I think 7 out of 10 thought that was just the Bank of England who creates money, which is, that's straight away, if you think that, there's straight away deficit in sort of the policies you're going to be putting together because you've got no understanding of something basic. So stuff like that needs to be rolled out to the masses. I think if people knew how money was created, there might be a bit more discussion.
So maybe just as a sort of quick expansion on this, just to sort of round it off, is that we sort of have 3 sort of principal aims or strategies that we try to do as Rethinking as a network. One of them is to support and grow the movement that we have. The other one is to campaign for curriculum reform, and the third one is, as Ben said, is democratise economics. Like, we think an additional part of how economics is able to perpetuate the theory it produces and the kind of lack of critical reflexivity that it has is because it's dominated by experts. Economics are experts. Despite the fact that only about 12 of them could predict the biggest financial crisis ever, they're experts in what they do. And what we're left is that we have this kind of stale representation of economics in the public sphere that most people don't engage with. What was you did a poll before the election?
Oh yeah, so we polled, there was 1,500 people in Manchester. We'd done a YouGov poll, and 75% of people couldn't correctly define GDP out of 5 definitions. So stuff like that straight away feeds into voting patterns, it's pretty crazy, really.
Yeah. So here's an example of something that you would get out of a mainstream newspaper on economics reporting. This is related to Greece. So, late on Wednesday night, the Governing Council of the ECB decided it would no longer accept Greek sovereign debt as collateral for its loans. Greece's junk-rated bonds have been subject to a waiver where the central bank accepted sovereign and bank debt as security in return for cheap ECB funding. What does that mean? How is the ordinary person, potentially people who aren't able to define GDP or feel quite detached from the normal mainstream economics discourse, supposed to have any intelligible representation of what this is talking about? But this is the news. This is how it comes out. So a lot of what we're looking at now is how do we actually make people economists, citizen economists? How do people actually critically engage with what we're going on in terms of mainstream debate and policy? One of the other things that we're doing at the moment is we've just sort of rolled out an adult education course. So a lot of the idea of that is going into areas where people, obviously there are people sympathetic, maybe like people in this room who come to these events, but also taking it further than that, the people that feel quite disassociated from these topics and about how it affects their local lives and communities, and trying to not say, this is how they do it, this is wrong, this is a particular policy, it's not correct, is to go there and say, this is what they're actually talking about. This is what people mean when they say interest rates, when they say ECB, when they say these different things. This is why people think inequality might be a good thing. This is why people might think it's bad. This is a value judgment that you can make. Not that there is a set narrative on which everything needs to go by, because economics engagement is so low, and ultimately economists, like Ben had mirrored this as well, you do an economics degree, you go home at Christmas and your parents ask you, also tell us about the financial crisis, and you can't. You can't talk to someone who's not an economist like you in that language, because you're not trained to, you're not taught in that way to actually engage critically with contemporary things. If you're interested in that, you have to find it elsewhere. You need to go to events like these, or find an academic in his, when he's in his office, and talk to them like that. And these are quite serious issues that sort of affect basically how our countries are run, and how, as we've heard earlier, all these kind of problems, systemic issues we have, is we need to get further from that and move from sort of an intellectual monoculture to an economics that is interactive and engageable by people within our population.
I mean, economists would probably say everyone's got perfect information. If everyone had perfect information, I don't think we'd be sitting here, would we?
No.
I think the economics would have changed by now.
Well, we're solidly imperfect, so...
Yeah. Should we take a question?
Yeah. I think there's one at the back.
Come back and then...
Yeah, just a couple of things, because you mentioned how a lot of the discourse is analyzed from the point of view, probably you were talking about the US, in terms of articles. But you mentioned about possibly engaging with schools and bringing economics there. I was just wondering whether potentially you can combine bringing the economics in, but combining with, let's say, geography or history, and then you can bring the Latin American, the Chinese, the Indian, the BRICS, everybody on board, Eastern Europe, whoever you want, and just link the economics with specific experiences and link that through history, to geography, to culture, and then you can bring in gender perspectives as well. And this is how bringing multidisciplinary approach could actually help with unraveling the economics language. And when you go to communities, then again, bringing back, talking about local economies, talking about local issues, and how these local issues are actually linked with the bigger picture of economics, because I've worked with communities before, and the essential problem is also with politics. When it's about politics, people think about London. They don't think about things that actually are affecting them on an everyday basis.
On the subject of democratising it, and Chang's book, which is excellent.
He gets commission mine, so I wouldn't say that.
I think it's the rethinking reader that you're talking about behind you. In terms of democratising it, do you have plans to make something like an internet simple course available, interactive? Because I'm part of a group that's also trying to do the same thing, and we'd love to plagiarise your works. It would make it so much easier.
We've got something.
So where we are actually is there is a film called Boom Bust Click that you may have heard of. Yeah. And we, as a network, have got funding basically to create a website for the film as kind of a legacy for it, and it's done by Terry Jones from Monty Python. It's puppets, and it's great. But what we're actually planning to do with that website is to make it into a central repository of like a economics learning section, so people can like engage with things. For it to be a up-to-date analysis of news, and also sort of a news portal. But this is kind of where we're going with things, is to create, also alongside the crash course, is to move people here and say, okay, here is a structured learning environment where you can start to engage with these issues, but there are also resources that are available, so you can get in touch with this more. There's more interactive ways of doing it, because at the moment it is really difficult. If you go on Wikipedia to learn about inflation, it gets heavy quickly. Like, that's not how people want to interact with things. So creating these resources is kind of the next step to forcing economics to sort of expand itself, because more people will start to participate. I mean, the format of what it is with Boom Bust Click is to make it much more that economics is a real world thing that people could be part of.
I think there'll be we're in the process of putting this together now. There'll be a learn, engage, and act section. All these will feed in, and I think we're actually on the lookout for people actually to actually input some knowledge into this, and anyone can send stuff in, which is fantastic as well. I suppose to answer the question at the back, I think if the idea of like interdisciplinary learning is what we want. Basically, we want more interdisciplinary learning. But I think first economics needs to first realise that they need history of economic thought, and then move on to encompassing geography within that and other subjects. I mean, in Manchester they do have the BA Econ in Manchester is very. So you can take courses from other subjects. So I can take 20 credits in politics, in other subjects. But so that's what's fantastic about that. It's just the economics part that's a little bit lacking.
Can I
kind of what your experience was when you went to university open days and you were kind of choosing to do economics? Because it strikes me that to be so dreadfully disappointed when you started your degree, there must be surely some kind of mismatch between what you're being told about what the course involves and then what it actually involves.
Well, I remember looking at the page for economics when I first looked at Manchester, and it was very... it made it sound like you had done a lot of critical thinking, a lot of actually looking for answers within the subject rather than getting told this is the answer. Don't question it. Actually, I wonder if I could get it up on here. Actually, they've changed a little bit.
Just remember, sort of, you're young and foolish. Like, you go in, you've got academic, the York Economics, you've got people that were published in big mainstream journals, there were names I recognised, and it was like, oh, this is great, like, this is really exciting. There's not really any other indicator about what you're going to get prior to that point. And that's something that we're trying to develop now, is to develop a kind of guide, and particularly more economics departments like Leeds that's receptive to the campaigns that we're trying to do and the events and things that we put on, is that they want to advertise this. Like Kingston University, which is now doing like a pluralist styled economics degree, is pushing it hard on its publicity now, because they realise that there's kind of a market to tap on this. There are people that want this, and no one else is kind of doing it. So you wonder whether that is completely will be the way of all the courses, or whether that's just something that will affect a few. But it's one of those things that honestly, so say one of the universities is number 5 in the country. You wouldn't expect the department and the content to be so lacking in critical.
But would you say that most people just want to do their degree and then go and work in a,
So that's a problem as well, that people. So economics is seen as a sort of flagship now, rather than finance for some reason. It's seen as a flagship for doing economics and then going and working in the city, rather than. So one of the arguments, I was arguing with someone the other week, and he said, well, yeah, I agree with all your points, but doesn't everyone just do economics to go and work in the city? Which is a really sort of foolish response to what we're doing, I feel. But the point about what Josh made about academics being, them citing academics on the drive for recruitment, Joseph Stiglitz was mentioned when I looked at Manchester, but when I arrived, speaking to people in the department, he'd done one day in a year there where he'd done a talk that was just open to PhD students, and he brought 20 PhD students with him from his university in America, and there was just 2 PhD students allowed in from Manchester, and he was paid. We try to get a Freedom of Information Act, because every time we get told that there's a lack of resources at the university, we get told, oh, it's just not enough resources for us to put alternative modules on. So we tried to get his wage, but we were rejected, unfortunately. But I'm pretty certain it was over 100 grand a year for just his name, really. And I mean, I like Stiglitz as well. It's a shame.
Maybe as a further answer, is kind of, we've had another experience in the room of this kind of thing. You went to a prestigious LSE, it's the School of Economics, and you get your first paper comes back and says you've thought about it. That's not good.
Well, you interview with critical thinkers, so your interview is with someone asking you to think critically, and then when you get there, they don't want you to think critically. You probably answered it with this website, but my only question was just, are you going to have a kind of plain English guide to economics? Because I'd love, the abbreviations, the terms, the economists. One of the questions I thought when you said, what is the economy? I thought, well, what would be left if we took the economy away, to try and make me think about it in a bit more real terms? So I was just wondering if that'd be on the side.
When this is developed, the Learn section will essentially be a structured learning/encyclopedia thing of economics, but on a simple, easy to understand level that will get progressively more complicated and interested, or engaged. Part of that as well is that we'll start producing resources, so we can come somewhere like this, we can do a kind of talk and say, if you don't know what feminist economics is, take this, it's a really easy to use guide, read it, pass it on. If you want to read some more, there are more available resources. It's just to get people engaged with things that now is quite difficult to access, but that most people are actually, going to these things is great. Hearing people's ideas and opinions about how do we change things, how do we engage with other stuff, these are important tools towards making that change. But when the language is taken up by a particular viewpoint, and when the public debate for it doesn't really exist, the tools by which you can have those conversations are kind of appropriated by whatever the mainstream discourse is. If I say sustainability now, even that's within economics mainstream as, a a very specific meaning that has got actually very little to do with environmentalism. So how do you have that debate now in the public sphere? Like, how do you take that back? Those are the kind of, this is what we're trying to approach, is to kind of kickstart that debate and practice.
Yeah, that's an increasing point about elements of economics becoming increasingly opaque. In a day job, I'm a consumer of economics, I work in the public sector. We try and make sense of when you get a set of maths and equations, they are not the economists you go to. You go to the economists with real world examples. I'll give one recently. We were looking at some stuff around, does agglomeration economics work or not? So here's the textbook on agglomeration economics. Pages and pages of equations, not a single place name in the index. So, yeah, what am I looking at? Yeah. No.
Yeah.
It's basically, I think I literally did throw it on my shoulder. It's just not understandable to a consumer.
No.
So we'll go to the economists that make it understandable for us. And they are out there. They're the ones we use.
Well, I mean, a guy who had David Graeber had an article in The Guardian last week on the upcoming financial crisis, if we're being a bit pessimistic on from your talk. And he's an social anthropologist, so I think that just shows a sort of example there where people are looking for opinions that are outside economics, where you have people actually explaining it or trying to explain it rather than, as you said, equation after equation. But there's also a sort of, especially in economics, there's a monopoly on textbooks as well. I mean, you've got Mankiw, who produces a lot of the textbooks, and a lot of the stuff in there is a load of drivel, to be honest.
I mean, an example, so David Graeber, who writes on, debt as a construction and he's very to the sort of left in the general scheme of things, very interesting. But, on that side of stuff, at our conference we had him sat at a panel with someone from the Bank of England and another quite mainstream opinion upon how debt is and how it functions. And that's how you get interesting ideas within economics. You get people that have different conceptions and thought processes, and you let people discuss it. Because otherwise those people will not engage each other. David Graeber will never meet a Treasury official, and they will not listen to each other. Well, whichever way, because those platforms for that kind of discussion don't exist. You produce policy for a particular output, you produce research for a particular audience, and there's no mixing within departments or within areas. So they're so separate. But actually when you get them together, it also makes the debate much more intelligible, because those people need to understand what they're saying to each other. They can't stay within their specific language bounds, and as soon as you open that up, you start to have a debate that is actually intelligible to a wider audience, instead of like this closed group of academics who are so particularly focused on this thing.
Yeah. We could round off the session because the time has gone by, and we have our next speaker. Talking a little bit about Terry and Theo and Ben, and Bill and Ben, because obviously we're going to have a screening of Boom Bust tonight. Theo is here, Terry is sadly in America. And really the kind of the social role that they see that film having, and how those guys have hopefully helped you to further your project too.
Yeah. So they've been really, really, we were surprised, like how passionate they were that they wanted this to be more than just a film about the financial crisis. They saw it as kind of this first step to creating something that, is engaging and interactive, and then how do we get people to sort of follow through with this. So they've worked really hard and to sort of give us the resources that we could do to kind of make the kind of what we thought would be the way forward. And they've been sort of engaging with us all the way and everything like that. But they're so amenable to kind of what the student audience is, what our experiences have been, what feedback we have from these sort of focus groups and everything else that we've done, is that we've had a really excellent opportunity through this to kind of start the first step of producing the resources that can be relevant to a lot of people. And although, might not be the actual central tome of all this stuff, is that it demonstrates a commitment from a group to actually trying to advance, take an issue, make it engaging, and follow it up with something that's engaged with what people are actually doing on the ground and what they want to be, a broader campaign and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and I mean the film's really good actually. Yeah. I mean, it's got puppets in, so economics and puppets. First, yeah.
No, but
it puts across in a very. We had a girl at our conference in April who was with her mother. She was only about 6, I think, and she came out with that and was like, wow, all the puppets and stuff. So stuff like that, different tools, isn't it, for different audiences, and which is good.
It's alleviating what is, like as I read out, what can be extremely dry and complicated into something that actually, it's a thing. It happened. It's a construction. People were involved in it. There were outputs. Those are intelligible. Like they can be discovered and they can be changed. And we need to start that kind of engagement and debate about how do we engage with it, and how do we think about stopping it happening again, instead of not teaching people that crises happen, which is still the case. At York University, since 2008, there has been no change to the core undergraduate modules. Nothing has changed. as a continuing pessimist. So.
More pessimism and some positivity about the film tonight. I hope.
Yeah.
Screening. Time marches on. Can we just thank our panelists, please?